We were told to stay on this side, and we have. And you see a lot of angry and some bigoted people on the left who have come over here, have tried to silence me or tried to mock me.
No EU, no registry, fuck white supremacy.
I'm with him that we need to watch who's coming into the countries. And it doesn't mean that we're stopping it forever, the immigration from the refugees. It just means for right now.
It's clearly a kind of overreactions by many American Muslims to Mr. Trump's statements. The truth is that he definitely concerned about some security, some safety, some peace that is happening due to Muslims or Islam being associated with many of these radical terror groups.
Protests all across the country, reaction from around the world after the president signed his executive order late Friday.
America is the land of freedom. The land of freedom.
So why would the president do this? Is it legal? Is it constitutional? And what kind of a process will we be seeing? I think the president is well intended, but there is a process here, and truthfully, I'm a professor of immigration law. Congress has the plenary power to make laws. The president is using his discretion in enforcing the laws on the book. The question is whether or not in the enforcement he is selectively choosing one over another. I do agree with the president, and I do believe he's a patriot and he's intending to do this well, that we need to have stronger vetting. You can't find documents from Syrians at all that are legitimate, so he shut it down from Syria. Well, is that the right approach, or are there other incremental efforts that we can make?
My name is Pranav Jandiala, and I'm the president of BridgeCal.
My name is Ross Irwin, and I'm part of the executive board.
So we kind of started developing this idea of BridgeCal back in November. This idea just started to come into place where we realized the importance, especially during the election and after the election, of having a platform, a nonpartisan political platform for discussion between both sides.
And we talked a little bit in the beginning of this second semester of the 2016-2017 year. Had plans in the works for the club, and once the Milo event happened, we felt that the time was now, and we moved on it and had our meeting a week after.
Mm-hmm. And, the violence served as the impetus. The violence was just, a symptom of the political divide. And we've seen these symptoms come up now and again, for the past several months, whether it be, Trump's rally in San Jose, or it be, some other event on Inauguration Day, or it be, the Milo event itself. We've seen instances where, passions are just spilling over, brimming over, this once sturdy glass that was able to contain ourselves was able to, encompass the kind of discussion that we were able to have. And I think that it's important for us to return to a state where the other side isn't just, an enemy or a racist or a bigot, but is someone that we can engage with and have productive discussions with, and, someone we might disagree with, but, someone who we're able to humanize with.
And that was the impetus for starting BridgeCal. We wanted to create a space where we could have two totally different viewpoints come and talk and understand what the other one wanted and needed and why they felt this way, and that we could both that both sides could leave the meeting with an understanding and hopefully new lessons and information learned about the other side.
Exactly.
There had been a court case, I don't remember the one right now, that was ruling on illegal aliens within the country being entitled to certain protections and laws, and that might constitute a reason for these immigrants or refugees from Syria, Iraq, Iran, and the four other countries, that those people might be protected within that. But then the counterpoint was that those people do not reside within American space, and so there was a lot of contention on that subject.
Yeah, and then when they, talked about American space, they pushed the boundaries and said, you know what, American space involves wherever we, extend our reach around the globe. And I think that the court case that was cited that you were talking about was the Texas Supreme Court case, allowing undocumented students to go to school in Texas.
Yeah.
We felt that it would be a good starting point in the discussion because once you can decide whether or not it's constitutional, even if you disagree or agree with its constitutionality, then there's a whole nother door of issues. And we thought that we get this out of the way, and then we can go ahead and really talk about the rest of the meat of this issue. So generally, I guess I would call myself a moderate in general, like very, very general sense. I do not think I have any very firm, unchanging political views that I truly believe will never be subject to actual change. Because I think that I really go back and forth on many issues where I talk to a lot of my conservative friends who wage very good arguments, and I talk to my liberal friends, very intellectual, wage very, very liberal arguments for those. And I'm very in the middle when it comes to a lot of political issues because of that. Now with this specifically, I am still very, very conflicted. I have two friends specifically, John Ryder and Rudra Reddy, who were two of the primary people leading that discussion the other day. Now they were debating themselves, the days leading up to the discussion, and it would be the case that they would come in with pages of research, and then they would, John had his views challenged, and he said, oh my God, Rudra's a genius, I don't know what's going on, my views are, and then he would come back and say, oh wait, but then this, and then Rudra would be like, oh, that's a good point. So it's like, when you get into the nuances of an issue and really, really talk about them, Rudra and John, very opposite sides of the political spectrum, but they had a very, very engaging back and forth on the days leading up to it, and I think that was reflected in the discussion.
I would say personally, in general, I kind of identify as a pretty extreme liberal, though as I come from a very conservative place, and that has led me to not necessarily back down on my liberal views, but try to understand where the other side is coming from, and I've been able to talk with a lot of people from my hometown who very understandably believe some of the things that I am very opposed to, and so I think that kind of makes me a moderate in the fact that I'm very understanding of the conservative side, and I also think that we need to, as liberals personally, to give some concession to it and to work with them in that. On the travel ban, I personally, though conflicted, I think I'm opposed. I did a lot of research into the terror attacks that have happened since 2000. There have been 3 that this travel ban would have prevented because they were by Somali nationals, and then I believe I'm not going to make a guess on the third one, but it was one of the countries in the travel ban this person was a citizen of. And all 3 of those attacks, none of them were deadly. Of course, there were probably in total about 30 people injured, and I know that people being injured is not something that we can just look past. But I think if you look at all of the other terrorist attacks that have happened on this soil, there have been far many and far worse attacks by people who were white supremacists or people born here who had never visited those countries, who then felt an allegiance to Islamic extremism, that's what pushed them. So I don't think that this travel ban is actually that good of a way to stop stop the things that it's claiming to stop, like terrorism within the.
I think that was an interesting point that was brought up, but really another counterpoint to that I really thought was interesting was that, you know, these same countries, if you want to look at the specific countries and analyze why they were chosen, we don't know the full information, and we can never know the full information of our government's actions internationally, but these were the exact same countries that Obama chose to mark as dangerous places where we should restrict immigration or, you know, try to prevent or have more stricter vetting measures for these specific countries. And though that would be, you know, a more preemptive measure, that would be a more measure that would be, seeing things in the foresight and looking at those specific countries and making a prediction based on them, rather than looking at events in the past or looking at what could have been prevented and looking at different things like that. So I think that it's important to consider that we don't know the full information about everything.
Additionally, honestly, another point that was brought up was that the deadliest terrorist attack in our nation, 9/11, was committed by 15 Saudi nationals, and then the other 4 were not from countries on the list. I believe there was like 2 from Pakistan and 1 from Egypt, and so that was though not a point waged on a collection of data. It was interesting to see that the worst attack possible wouldn't have even been hindered by this ban.
Yeah, I do agree with that point very much. So the next question we had after whether or not it was constitutional was whether or not it constituted xenophobia, and the way we define xenophobia. Or the way we wanted people to think about it was the UNESCO definition, which was an attitudinal orientation of hostility against non-natives in a given population. So that's the most popular accepted definition of xenophobia. So whether or not it constituted xenophobia was less of a kind of question that required research, and was more of a question that, you know, more people could talk about and more people participated, and we definitely saw that during the discussion. And I think that a couple conservatives in the discussion, you know, they admitted, you know what, yeah, like if you define it this way, sure, it would constitute xenophobia, right? But is the xenophobia justified or unjustified? Should we fear the immigration of a large amount of Islamic people or not? And that's the real question that they brought up, and I thought that was interesting.
There was a lot of talk about what has happened in Europe in some neighborhoods where the police are legitimately not able to come because these neighborhoods are now being ruled through Sharia law by people within these communities that have either put themselves in that place or been elected to that place. And we have this. In America, there's total religious freedom. It is the First Amendment to our Constitution. But we still do not allow religions to simply take hold of pieces of territory and rule them for themselves. That is not protected. And so there was a lot of argument about, well, if we let in the same number of immigrants that Europe has, then we might be facing some more serious problems.
And I think even some liberals were in agreement that yes, this is a very concrete issue. And they said, you know what, we should be talking about this concrete issue rather than this, ambiguous issue of whether or not they would come and they would actually engage in these specific acts that we predict them to engage in. So they a few liberals, moderate liberals, talked about, wanting to focus in on the concrete issues around the world that we should be focusing on, that the conservatives brought up too. I do think that, a lot of people brought up good arguments for why it would constitute xenophobia that would be unjustified. And I think that, when you look at the ban specifically, you look at the different countries and you see obviously that they have a Muslim majority population. And what you're going on in many cases, regardless of what Obama or previous people did, but you're going on this assumption. And I think it's somewhat a legitimate claim that you're going on the assumption that Islam is a danger to us, and that whether or not that is true is a question for future discussion. But if you do hold the claim that Islam is a religion like any other religion, and that there are definitely some peaceful practitioners of it, and that we shouldn't discriminate people on the basis of Islam. And if you believe we shouldn't discriminate, so a lot of people argued if we shouldn't discriminate people on the basis of their religion, and if Islam is a religion like any other religion, then why should we, ban these specific countries on the basis of them having a large Muslim majority population? So that's the fundamental argument that we saw for, when people said, does this executive action constitute xenophobia? They said yes, and this is why they said yes.
But then there was also a point that if this quote unquote Muslim ban, as so many hashtags and headlines have called it, if it's xenophobic, then why are there huge populations of Muslims in other countries like Indonesia and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia that were not targeted for this? If it was against Muslims, you would assume that countries with even higher populations of Muslims would also be targeted. However, there was also a point that these countries are some of the most homogenous, most homogeneously Muslim of any other countries. There's not a country on this list that is less than 90% Muslim. In fact, there's not a country on the list besides Syria that is less than 96% Muslim. Syria is 90% Muslim, but then there are a lot of debates about Syria and documentation that are a whole different animal than racism.
Exactly, and documentation is another issue. And our future question was, how we would deal with the Syrian refugee crisis, given that it's very hard to distinguish, the right people from the wrong people, and then it's very plausible that the wrong people could be could surround themselves within these good people and be able to get in unnoticed because of this very shaky documentation that they have, no sturdy proof that they can provide that they aren't part of these different terror groups or organizations.
Is basically, I would say, kind of the root of this question and of this whole debate. The travel ban is mainly meant to, or it has been broadcast to the public to lessen the threat of terrorism and extremism that these countries might bring. And so this question was a lot based around just, is it actually, will this significantly help the safety of the American people, and at what cost?
Yeah, and I definitely think that's true. And when we got to this question, what a lot of people said was no. And I think both liberals and conservatives we're in agreement that, this isn't the best effective way, because a lot of conservatives were in agreement that, we need countries like Saudi Arabia on the list. We need other countries on the list too. And they said even, this is an end-all be-all to the problem of terrorism. So, it's not a good question. The question should be whether or not this is a step in the right direction, whether or not this is an action that we should take to address terrorism, not whether or not it is for sure going to be effective. And I think that was an important distinction that someone drew in the audience. And I think that a lot of conservatives would say it doesn't matter whether or not it's strictly going to be effective. It matters whether or not it's going to be a step in the right direction. It matters whether or not it's a step that we should take that could help us. And I think that when you prioritize security so highly, which a lot of people do, when you prioritize security that highly, then you're willing to take some sacrifices. You're willing to restrict a lot of people from coming here, a lot of good people from coming here, who could probably contribute to our economy. You can have a lot better lives here, and just completely be peaceful citizens here. But you're willing to prioritize the security of the American people over that, and that's simply one of the fundamental types of beliefs. And when you have this micro foundation of security versus something like equality or something like freedom or different things like that, and when you prioritize security, this is the kind of belief system that's developed among conservatives.
But one of the liberal arguments to this that I found a lot of truth in is that this policy does not have its only effect is not just to stop people from coming in. These are people with sentiments and such a strong desire to come into the U.S. that you see the United States of America turn you away and say, you're not worth it to us because we're scared that you're a danger. A lot of the argument was, well, okay, sure, we may be stopping terrorists from coming in, but are we actively creating terrorists with these policies that seem to exclude solely on religious background? And of course, there's an argument that it's not solely on religious background, but when the entire media has publicized it as the Muslim ban, it's hard to separate what President Trump was trying to do and what the effect of it was.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely the crux of the question. The term Muslim ban itself, we were there was a big issue with the naming of the event itself that we had to deal with. And we realized, as we went on, the political implications of the way this thing is perceived in the first place. And the media plays a big role. And it's one thing, what the executive order actually says is one thing. And I honestly think very few people have read it. Very few people who have strong opinions on it have read it. So when there's one thing, is the executive order itself. That's one thing. But then the other thing is entirely is, the perception of it and the buildup of the perception of it. And that's fueled by the media. That's fueled by, the people you talk to. That's fueled by terms like the Muslim ban. So there's one thing and there's another thing. And I think it's important to focus in on the actual executive order, that document itself, and to, for both liberals and conservatives to engage in discussion, to focus on the exact document rather than to, follow the media, follow perceptions like that. And, whether you look at it and still, perceive it as a Muslim ban, that's another thing too. And I think that a lot of the thing is when a lot of people, or a lot of conservatives said, when a lot of people actually read it, they would go from calling it to a Muslim ban, to something else.
Absolutely.
Because the ban or the executive order itself is a lot different from what a lot of people think. And personally, that was the case for me. I didn't read it actually in entirety until a few days before we started making the presentation. And when I read it in entirety, I was actually pretty surprised at the language of it. And I construed it as something entirely different, but it seemed like a more of a normal kind of political action than something else.
In a perfect world, what would an effective response to the refugee crisis and terrorism be? That would, in a perfect BridgeCal, we would sit down and we would write down specific policies, but it's never going to be as clean as that. But I think that I felt that we reached some common ground within the sides and definitely an understanding of what the other side might want and what your side might want and how those two can work together.
Yeah. I thought this question specifically, during the discussion, we found, astounding amount of agreement from people who were just absolutely contentious in the beginning of the discussion.
Very true.
Found a lot of agreement on the idea that, the United States needs to stop its militaristic impulses, needs to stop its imperialistic impulses, needs to stop contributing to the spread of terrorism around the world. And the way to do that is, pull out of the Middle East. I think Donald Trump himself wants to pull out of the Middle East, right? Yeah. I think that there's a lot of agreement on, the causes of terrorism and how to prevent the causes of terrorism. On the Syrian refugee crisis itself, there was some disagreement on whether or not, the United States would have a moral or political responsibility to non-U.S. citizens fleeing situations in their own countries. Should we help people in general? And I think that, the first impulse is to say yes, of course, right? But then, when you get into the specifics of it, when you get into how exactly it would play out logistically, when you actually look at, the specific vetting procedures that we have in place, the kinds that we would develop, even if we have the strictest, how likely it would be, or how plausible it would be and easy it would be for somebody who's pretending to be a good actor, who's actually a bad actor, come in, it becomes a more difficult question. And, whether or not you still believe that the United States does have, a responsibility to bring these people in is entirely up to you. But I think it's important for everyone to understand not only things from a perspective of, what we ought to do, but also understand the current day realities and the situations.
What we can do.
Exactly. What we can do as a country.
And I think that often a lot of people, no one offered up their home for these Syrian refugees to come stay in, but also no one said, no, I hate them. I'm glad that they're dying. There's the issue becomes not do we or don't we help them, but how much can we help them? And there was an interesting a point that some of these people within Syria and other kind of war-torn nations have pretty close, mainly Islamic countries that would be, in a cultural standpoint, a better fit for these people. They're closer. You don't have to get on a plane, but And so I think that there was some good points about, maybe we can't bring in this many, but maybe we can help people in this way. And so that was interesting.
So it was the idea of, relocating them to countries, within their sphere rather than bring them all the way across the world to the United States, which was an important point. And I think it's a very real point. Another conservative argument I heard that I thought was interesting, kind of surprised me, was, we shouldn't do this in a political way. Like, we can do this without having to, have orders and agreements. And
I would say that was from a libertarian perspective, which I think is an important distinction.
Yeah, it was a libertarian's perspective that, what if people just did this on an individual basis? What if people said, I personally can house these people, and brought them in of their own accord and said, okay, I'm going to do this to help out these people on my individual basis. So it's the idea of charity, or the idea of helping people out, but turning it from a kind of mandate of authority into something that people can do of their own accord and individual will, which I think is important. Like you said, in a perfect world, in a BridgeCal perfect world, we'd have a very productive discussion where you have people, from this side of the political spectrum, and this side of the political spectrum, to come together and form an agreement on the ban itself, and also an agreement on the kind of procedures we should develop with regard to these refugees. And I think, me and you had a discussion itself, a couple of weeks before the actual discussion, where we said, I was taking a conservative stance, you were taking a liberal stance. And I said, if you look at Sweden, for example, look at what's happening in capital Sweden. Sexual assault rates have increased, and here's some proof that it could be a result of different Muslim groups coming in, and also especially the fact that Sweden changed laws to not document the ethnicity or religion of the person of the attacker in sexual assault cases. When you saw this rapid increase, and I think that people like Milo, for example, bring this up continuously as a very big point. And then you said, what? Why don't we have some kind of policy in place where we're willing to bring people in, but also, crack down on sexual assault crimes as well. And if we see this kind of trend happening, the same things we've seen in other countries when you've had massive amounts of immigration from refugees, then we would curtail it, we would stop it. Or we can have a plan in place where we will document the ethnicity and religion of the attacker in the first place.
And their place of origin.
Exactly. And it's constant compromise that develops policy. It's compromise between both sides. And you have your points, and then these points are also valid. But the trick is being able to hold on to your ideals still, but able to do that in a way where you're still allowed to be productive in forming policy, and you're still allowed to give the other side a chance, and give the other side a chance, and there's a back and forth as well.
And I think that in a more broad sense that we've gotten to a place where politicians aren't able to win on the fact that by shouting from the rooftops that they'll work with the other side. There's an inherent, I will make sure to fight tooth and nail for every conservative, every liberal, every libertarian, ideal, and I won't let it go. And I think that boxes these politicians into exactly that, into an unwillingness to compromise and work with each other. And I think that it's absolutely detrimental to the nation for 50% of it to say we want these policies and we won't have these policies, and the other side to be in almost completely disagreement with them simply based on party lines. And that's what we're hoping to fix at BridgeCal. That we think with discussions like this, we found common ground and we found a way forward within this policy.
And I think an important thing you brought up is the chicken and egg question. Is the idea is it the constituents that are fueling this divide, or is it the politicians that represent the constituents that are fueling this divide? I think it's a little bit of both, right? So I think that the way to fix this is to have a cultural change in which you have liberals and conservatives talking to the other side and actually understanding their points and beliefs, and putting their own points and beliefs under continual tests of strength, and just opening avenues of communication between people in general, not only politicians, but people in this nation need to open up avenues of communication to the other side and have a willingness to engage in discussion and debate that challenges your points of views, but also to detoxify debate and discussion, where rather than a shouting match, it becomes, and it's a lot harder to do this. It's a lot harder to do this than a shouting match, but it's so necessary. Absolutely. Rather than a shouting match, it needs to be one in which, we really patiently listen, we take away what we can, we understand exactly where they're coming from, and then we respond. But we respond in a way that doesn't try to just, that isn't just a rehearsed way of reinforcing our own beliefs, but, incorporates their own micro foundations as well. So if we're appealing to a conservative about security on, an issue like trans rights, then we should frame it in that specific way, rather than just, having the same type of dialogue that we've been having. We need to appeal to the other side, if we want to change their views. Yeah. And if we can't change their views, that's fine too. But we shouldn't agree to disagree. Yeah. We should still always engage in continual discussion. And that's the way we move forward. Yeah.